I worked overtime for months. Then I found out where my paycheck was really going. I had been working overtime for months, late nights, weekends, no breaks, because my boss swore we were tight on budget. I barely saw my family. I was exhausted, but I needed the extra pay. Except, when I checked my bank account one day, something felt off. My paycheck wasn't adding up. That's when I started digging, and what I found made my blood run cold. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. It all started with the overtime requests. At first, it seemed harmless. My manager, Greg, came to me one Monday morning with that usual big project talk. "We need all hands on deck for this one," he said, his voice urgent, but with a hidden smile that suggested it was a big opportunity. Of course, I was eager to help out. My family needed the extra income, and who didn't want to impress the boss? Over the next few weeks, it was the same story. Greg would come to me, sometimes at the end of the day, sometimes on weekends, and ask for help. Just a few more hours, I promise. He'd make it sound like it was for the company, like we were all in it together. I didn't mind at first. My paycheck was looking great, and my wife and kids were happy to see the extra money in our account. Sure, I was more tired than usual, but they were worth it. I was doing it for them. But then, the hours kept piling up. I started working overtime 3 or 4 times a week. Weekends became a blur of emails, phone calls, and spreadsheets. I didn't even realize how much I'd given up. Family dinners, time with friends, my health. My wife started commenting on how tired I looked. "Are you sure you're okay?" she'd ask, but I always brushed it off. I had to keep going. Then, one night, I was getting ready to leave the office after another 12-hour shift when I glanced at the time. It was nearly 11:30 p.m. I had been working for over 2 months, and still no signs of slowing down. I pulled out my phone to check my bank balance, thinking it was time to look at my last paycheck. I had always trusted the HR system, but that night, something felt off. I opened my app and stared at the numbers. My most recent paycheck was nearly the same as the one from 2 weeks ago. Wait, what? There was no way. I clicked on the breakdown: taxes, deductions, overtime pay. But when I did, my stomach dropped. The overtime pay I was expecting? It was lower than I thought, much lower. In fact, the overtime pay was almost non-existent. The hours I'd been working were hardly reflected in my paycheck at all. My blood started to run cold. I had been working all these hours, sacrificing my personal life, and this was all I was getting? That wasn't right. I felt my pulse quicken as I grabbed my jacket and ran back to Greg's office. There had to be an explanation. I had to confront him about this. But as I walked down the dark hallways, something told me this was going to be more complicated than I expected. I knocked on Greg's office door, my hand shaking slightly. My brain was racing with all sorts of questions. How could this happen? Was it a mistake, or was I being scammed? Greg looked up from his computer screen when I walked in. His usual warm smile faded slightly as he saw the look on my face. "What's up, man? You still here?" he asked casually, though his tone was a bit off. "Yeah, I need to talk to you about my paycheck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been working all this overtime, but the pay isn't matching up. Something's wrong." Greg raised an eyebrow but didn't seem surprised. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "What do you mean? The overtime pay's all processed correctly, isn't it?" I pulled out my phone, opened the app again, and showed him the numbers. "It's not adding up, Greg. I've been here for over 2 months, pulling late nights and weekends, and this is all I'm getting." I was trying to stay calm, but I could feel the frustration bubbling up. "I know the numbers I've worked, and this doesn't reflect it." He glanced at my phone, then back at me. "You're really going to make a big deal out of this? You've been getting paid for your regular hours, plus some extra for the overtime. Maybe you're just looking at it wrong." I stared at him, trying to process his words. Something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. It felt dismissive. I thought about the last few months, all the late nights I spent in that office, sacrificing time with my family, my life outside of work, and now I was getting brushed off. "I'm not looking at it wrong, Greg," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice even. "I've been working 20, 30 hours of overtime a week, and this doesn't match. This isn't right. If something's wrong with the accounting, we need to fix it." Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair, then sighed. All right. Maybe there's been a mistake. I'll look into it. Just relax for now, okay?" But his tone wasn't reassuring. It was too casual, almost like he wasn't taking me seriously. Something was off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I wasn't going to get any real answers just by talking to him. I left his office feeling uneasy, a pit in my stomach. I knew I couldn't just let this go. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust. If he was hiding something, I needed to find out what. That night, I stayed up late, going over the past few months of overtime hours I had logged. I started comparing them with my pay stubs, and my suspicions grew. The numbers were off, by a lot. It wasn't just a mistake. Someone was actively manipulating the hours. But who? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Greg wasn't the only one involved. There were others in the company who had access to this data. HR, the accounting department, maybe even the higher-ups. Whoever was behind this had a lot to gain by cutting corners and skimming money off the top. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the only one being shortchanged. There were likely other employees in the same position. I couldn't keep quiet. Not anymore. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had uncovered. I was furious, but also scared. I had no idea how deep this went or who I could trust. My mind was racing with all the possibilities. Was Greg the mastermind behind this, or was he just as clueless as I was? Was this part of a larger scheme to underpay employees across the board? I knew I needed to take action, but I couldn't do it alone. I needed proof, and I needed to figure out exactly how deep this went. I decided to talk to a few coworkers to see if they had noticed anything strange in their own paychecks. By the time lunch rolled around, I had my answer. I met up with a couple of guys from the accounting department, Tom and Evan. We'd worked together before, and I knew they were decent guys, but I wasn't sure if they'd want to get involved. Still, I had to try. "So, I've got a weird question," I started, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear us. "Have you guys noticed anything strange with your paychecks recently? I mean, overtime isn't exactly adding up for me, and I've been working way more hours than I'm getting paid for." Tom looked at me, eyes wide. "Wait, are you serious? I thought it was just me. I've been putting in extra hours too, and my paycheck has been way lower than I expected. It's like I'm getting paid for half of what I actually worked." Evan nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Yeah, I noticed the same thing. I didn't say anything, though, because I figured it was just an error or something. But now that you mention it," he trailed off, looking around nervously. "You think someone's doing this on purpose?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice. "I don't know, but I think we're getting screwed over here. I've been digging into my pay stubs, and it's clear that someone's been adjusting the overtime hours. I can't be the only one." Tom and Evan exchanged looks. I could tell they were both uneasy. Finally, Tom spoke up. "Look, I don't know much about how the overtime is handled, but I do know that HR has been tightening up the budget lately. We've all been hearing about cutbacks, right? Maybe someone's been trimming overtime hours to save money." "That's exactly what I'm thinking," I replied, my mind spinning. "But this is more than just trimming. It's like they're actively hiding the hours and paying us less than we deserve." Evan's face turned pale. "But if we say anything, we could get in trouble. You know how things go around here." I could tell he was scared, and I didn't blame him. The last thing any of us wanted was to rock the boat and risk losing our jobs. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that we couldn't stay silent. If we didn't speak up, we'd all keep getting shortchanged, and it might get worse for others down the line. "I know it's risky," I said, trying to sound calm despite the anger bubbling inside me. "But we can't just let this slide. We have to do something." Tom and Evan exchanged more glances. Finally, Evan sighed. "All right, I'm in. Let's figure this out, but we have to be careful. We don't know who's involved or how deep this goes. If it's as big as you think, this could get ugly." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and fear. We were going to take a stand, but the stakes were higher than I had imagined. As we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whoever was pulling the strings was going to try to cover their tracks. It was only a matter of time before things started getting messy, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Over the next few days, I kept digging, gathering more evidence. I couldn't risk waiting too long. Every time I looked at my paycheck, that nagging feeling in the back of my mind grew stronger. Something didn't add up, and I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. I decided to go to HR and see if I could find any answers. They had to know something about the overtime discrepancies. But the problem was, HR wasn't exactly known for being transparent. They were always quick to redirect any questions about payroll, and just as quick to blame system glitches. But this time, I wasn't going to let them off easy. I walked into the HR office, trying to look casual, but my heart was pounding in my chest. As soon as I stepped through the door, I saw Amanda, the HR manager, behind the desk. She gave me a tight smile. "Hi there, John. How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice sweet but overly rehearsed. "Hey, Amanda," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. I've been looking over my paychecks, and I've noticed a few discrepancies. Specifically, I'm concerned about my overtime hours. I've been working extra, but it doesn't look like I'm getting paid for all of it. Could you take a look? Amanda nodded, but I could tell she was already getting defensive. Let me check our records. It could be a mistake. We've been updating the system lately. Sometimes it takes a little time for everything to sync up. I wasn't buying it. I've checked my pay stubs, I said, leaning forward. This is more than just a mistake. It looks like hours are being skipped or adjusted. Can you explain why? Amanda hesitated for a moment, tapping away at her keyboard. You're right. There was an issue with the system earlier this year. A few employees noticed some inconsistencies, but we fixed it. You should have seen the corrected amounts by now. I didn't trust her. Okay, but I'm not the only one. I've talked to a few coworkers and they're noticing the same thing. It's not just me. How do you explain that? She paused, her face going pale. For a split second I could see the mask slip, and she looked genuinely worried, but then she quickly regained her composure. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. We'll look into it and make sure everything is fine. Is there anything else? I could feel my frustration building. It was so clear now. This wasn't just a simple system error. Someone was intentionally covering something up, and Amanda was either a part of it or she was too scared to ask the right questions herself. Before I could say anything more, Amanda quickly turned back to her screen and started typing furiously. I'll need to escalate this to our accounting team. They should have more information, but I assure you there's nothing malicious going on here. I didn't believe a word she said, but what could I do? If I pushed too hard, I risked raising suspicion and possibly even making things worse for myself. I guess I'll wait for your update, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I turned to leave, but before I stepped out the door, I heard Amanda mutter something under her breath. Just don't go talking about this to anyone. It'll all get sorted out. I stopped in my tracks. The tone in her voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the first time I had sensed something off, but now it was all too real. She was trying to intimidate me into staying quiet. I wasn't about to back down now. As I walked out of the HR office, I felt the weight of the situation growing heavier. I had to find out the truth. If I didn't, I was going to be just another employee who got swept under the rug. I needed to take action, and I needed a plan. I spent the next few days lying low at work, trying not to make any waves while I quietly gathered more information. I couldn't afford to be too obvious. If Amanda, or anyone else, caught wind of what I was doing, I might be in even deeper trouble than I already was. But I wasn't backing down. I started talking to more of my coworkers, trying to subtly fish for information without raising suspicion. The more I spoke to them, the more I realized just how deep this went. I heard stories about missing hours, paycheck discrepancies, and overtime that never made it onto pay stubs. Everyone seemed to have a similar story, but no one was brave enough to take action. That's when I met Sarah, someone I didn't expect to help me, but who ended up being a crucial part of the puzzle. Sarah had been with the company for a while, but she was known to be a bit of a loner. People didn't really mess with her, and she didn't engage much with the office gossip. I had overheard her once talking about some financial weirdness with her paycheck, and that was when I decided to approach her. We met in the break room, just the two of us. I grabbed my coffee, sat down across from her, and kept things casual. Hey Sarah, I said, taking a deep breath. Can I ask you something? I know this might sound weird, but have you noticed any issues with your pay recently? Missing hours or overtime not being paid? She looked up from her phone, clearly surprised by my directness. For a moment she didn't respond, but then her face hardened. You're not the first person to ask me that, she said quietly. Actually, it's been going on for months. I've been keeping track of my hours. Every time I look at my pay, something doesn't match up, but I didn't think anyone else noticed. I couldn't believe it. My heart raced as I leaned in. What do you think is going on? Is it a mistake or... It's not a mistake, Sarah interrupted, her voice steady but serious. I think they're deliberately underpaying us. I don't know who's behind it, but I've seen the pattern. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just a mistake. This was calculated. I've been trying to figure it out for a while, she continued, lowering her voice. I started keeping track of my hours and paychecks too. It's been a gradual thing, but I'm sure now they're stealing from us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The weight of it all started to settle in. If Sarah was right, this wasn't just about me. It was about a whole group of people getting shortchanged. Have you talked to HR? I asked, my mind racing. She shook her head. I tried once. Amanda just brushed me off. I don't think they'll do anything about it. I felt my frustration rise again. The same thing had happened to me, being dismissed by HR, as if we were just numbers in a system. So what do we do? I asked. Sarah looked around cautiously before leaning in closer. I've been thinking about it, and I'm not letting them get away with this. We need to go straight to the top. If we have proof, real, hard evidence, they can't deny it. I nodded. We can't let this slide. It's not just our money, it's the principle. We're getting robbed, and someone has to pay for that. Sarah's eyes lit up with determination. Exactly. I've been digging through some old emails, payroll records, everything I can find. I've got some documents that show the discrepancies. We just need to get more people on board. I felt a surge of hope. This was the break I needed. With Sarah's help, maybe we had a chance to get to the bottom of this. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The higher-ups would fight back. They'd want to keep this quiet no matter what it took. But I was ready for that fight, and this time, I wasn't going to let them win. Sarah and I began working together, keeping our conversations quiet and discreet. We knew that if anyone found out what we were up to, it could ruin everything. We needed solid proof, and we needed it fast. Over the next few weeks, we both meticulously gathered more evidence, scrutinizing our pay stubs, cross-referencing hours worked, and comparing notes with other employees who had similar complaints. We knew we were on the verge of uncovering something huge, but the closer we got to the truth, the more we realized how powerful our bosses were. Amanda seemed to be aware of the growing tension at the office. She started to act even more distant, more controlling, trying to prevent us from talking about the discrepancies. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something we didn't. It felt like she was hiding something, a secret she desperately wanted to protect. It was during one of our late-night work sessions that Sarah and I finally cracked the code. We had been going through a set of emails from the past 6 months when we discovered a chain of messages from Amanda to upper management, talking about ways to cut costs by underreporting employee hours. It was clear. This was no accident. They had planned it all along. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the emails. We weren't just being underpaid, we had been lied to, manipulated, and robbed. There was even a list of employees whose hours had been manipulated, and my name was on it. The rage that bubbled up inside me was hard to contain. They had used us like pawns, making money off our hard work while we were left struggling. I showed Sarah the emails, and we both stared at the screen in silence. The reality of what we had uncovered hit us like a ton of bricks. We knew that this wasn't just a personal issue anymore. It was a matter of justice. We couldn't let them get away with it. We need to expose this, I said, my voice shaking with anger. We have everything we need. All we have to do is make it public. Sarah nodded, but her face was pale. It's not going to be easy. If we go public, Amanda and the others will do everything they can to silence us. I knew she was right. There was so much at stake, but I couldn't back down. I had a family to support, and I wasn't going to let them get away with stealing from me or from anyone else. This was our chance to fight back. We don't have a choice, I said, my voice firm. We have to take them down. But there was still one more thing I needed to figure out. How we were going to expose them without putting ourselves at risk. I wasn't sure if we had the power to take on such a large corporation. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we couldn't just send an anonymous tip or leave it to chance. This wasn't a minor mistake or an isolated incident. It was a full-blown scheme to exploit employees for profit. Exposing this would require a plan, a solid one that could withstand the retaliation I knew was coming. I couldn't afford to be reckless, especially with the threat of losing my job, and Sarah's too. We decided to approach the situation strategically. I started looking into whistleblower laws, figuring out how to legally protect ourselves. Sarah helped me reach out to a lawyer who specialized in employment law. After some back and forth, we got advice on how to handle the evidence we had. But as we were making plans, Amanda seemed to be getting more suspicious. It felt like she was watching us. Every time we'd go to the break room, she'd follow us in. Every time we'd talk in the hall, she'd appear around the corner. The paranoia was starting to eat at me. It was as if she knew something was coming and was doing everything she could to stay one step ahead. One evening, as Sarah and I sat in my car after work, reviewing the evidence one last time, I noticed something odd. Amanda's car was parked across the street, and she was sitting in it, staring at us. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't done anything yet. How did she know? "She's onto us," I whispered, panic rising in my chest. Sarah's expression hardened. "We can't stop now. We've come too far." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that every move we made was being calculated. I had to admit, if Amanda really knew, things could get ugly fast. We knew it was time to make a move. We couldn't keep hiding behind closed doors, waiting for the perfect moment. We had enough evidence, and we had the legal protections in place. It was now or never. The next morning, I made the call. I'd been in contact with an investigative journalist who had worked on corporate corruption stories before. It was risky, but I didn't have many options. This would give us a chance to expose everything while protecting our identities. The journalist was as shocked as I was when I shared the details. He wanted to meet in person, and we agreed on a place away from prying eyes. We had to be discreet. It was time to set the trap. But just as we were gearing up to make the final move, I received an unexpected text message from Amanda. The message was short, but its implications were anything but. "I know what you're doing. If you go through with this, you'll regret it. I can destroy you both." I froze. The message from Amanda hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the screen, the words echoing in my head. She knew. She really knew what we were about to do. I showed Sarah the text, and she didn't say anything at first. She just stared at it, her eyes wide with fear. I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with a plan. But there was no easy solution. We were cornered. "She's threatening us," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "What if she can make good on that threat?" I shook my head. "We can't back down now, not after everything we've uncovered." We sat there for a moment, the weight of the situation sinking in. I knew that this was the moment where things would either crumble or we would have our shot at justice. But I couldn't let fear control me, not now. "We've got the evidence," I said finally. "We've done everything right. We're not the ones who should be afraid here. She's the one breaking the law." Sarah took a deep breath, nodding in agreement. "You're right. We've worked too hard for this." It was then that I realized Amanda could try to intimidate us. She could threaten us, but she couldn't erase the truth. The evidence we had was solid, and it would expose her for what she truly was, a manipulator and a thief. I texted the journalist back, telling him that it was time. We'd meet at the predetermined spot, and from there, everything would fall into place. There was no turning back. We had to take this risk, not just for us, but for all the other employees who were silently suffering like we had. That evening, we met the journalist, who immediately took us to a secure location to hand over the evidence. We sat there for hours, detailing everything: the falsified hours, the emails, the plans to undercut employee pay. The journalist was both horrified and impressed. He promised us that he would make sure our identities stayed protected, but more importantly, he assured us that he would get the story out to the right people. A few weeks later, everything exploded. The story broke wide open. Amanda and the higher-ups at the company were exposed for their fraudulent activities. The public outrage was swift, and within days, the company's stock plummeted. Amanda was placed on administrative leave, and multiple investigations were launched. It felt surreal, watching it all unfold. As for Sarah and me, we didn't face any immediate consequences. Thanks to the legal protections and the journalist's help, we were able to keep our jobs for now. But more than that, we had reclaimed our dignity. I never expected to be caught in something so dangerous, but in the end, we did the right thing. I never forgot that text from Amanda, though. Her attempt to control us through fear. It didn't work. And that was the most powerful thing we could have done. Stand up, expose the truth, and take our power back. Before we end this story, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's keep going.